Hello YouTubers, welcome to Big Buddha is Watching. I'm Big Buddha and we're well into the Red Dwarf marathon now, in which I'm reviewing every series by series. So today we're up to Red Dwarf 4, which was first broadcast in February and March of 1991. And Series 4 is a series that holds a special place in my heart, really, as it's the series where I first started to avidly watch it. I saw the first episode broadcast, which was Camille, and from then on it was really compulsive viewing. Camille was the episode which really drew me in, which really got me, maybe not hooked, but it became compulsive viewing. It became something I wanted to watch, something that I enjoyed and looked forward to each week. As I say, I had seen it here and there. I can remember seeing Me Squared round at a friend's house. They taped it from the night before. I think that was the first episode that I ever watched, but not really getting it, not really engaging with the humour, just thinking, what is this program? It's so bizarre. In fact, when I came to watch Series 4, I was slightly confused at why there was only one Rimmer. I was under the impression, just from I maybe didn't see the whole episode, but I was under the impression that there were two Rimmers. That was the whole crux of the series, and that was something that was layered into that was something that would be consistent, but apparently not. It was just for that one episode. So I remember, but I do have very vivid memories of watching Me Squared when it was originally broadcast. Didn't see any of Series 2, I don't think. Series 3, as I mentioned before, I remember seeing the last 10 minutes of each episode, so I remembered things like Rimmer blowing up at the end of Time Slides, the end of Polymorph, them getting rescued at the end of Marooned, things like that really stuck in the memory. But it wasn't until Series 4 that I really sat down and watched it and engaged with the programme and got what it was. A sitcom set in space, a science fiction show, and something really funny. There's a layer of gross out humour, especially from Rob Grant's writing, that really obviously engaged with the 11-year-old me. It's a real boys program. It's I always think of it as being as there being a year-long gap because of the broadcast dates. The one where they had a 2-year gap in transmission, because Series 3 is at 89 and Series 4 is 1991. I always think, there was no 1990 series, but actually if you look at the broadcast dates, Series 3 ended in December 89 and broadcast started in February of 91. So really there's only a year difference between the two series as well. And I'd say Series 3 and 4 could almost be one series, in that there's very little shake up of the formula like there was between Series 2 and Series 3. Everything that came about at the start of Series 3 is pretty much retained. I think the only exception really is Rimmer's hat, which is gone at this point, but everything else is held over. Hattie Hatridge is now firmly established as Holly. Crichton obviously is firmly established as a character and developed further in the series. He's given much more to do. He's washing, cleaning obsession is extrapolated more upon in this series, as is something that was alluded to way back in Series 2 in the Crichton episode of David Ross, which is Lister essentially taking Crichton under his wing and tried to make him break his programming and become more rebellious, just so he can defy Rimmer, really. Lister has no problem with being weighted hand on foot by Crichton, but he does it because to annoy Rimmer. And this, of course, leads to the classic Smee-He scene, which is Crichton not being able to say Smeghead, probably because of his behaviour protocols. And the classic Crichton taking his driving test scene in this series, which also has the extra layer of him trying to be rude to Rimmer throughout the test, as well as some great jokes about turning on Starbug, but just the window wipers coming on, and then him accidentally hitting the ejector seat and sending Rimmer, who's the instructor, flying through the air. And then the great moment where he just wanders back in very nonchalantly, as if nothing's happened, and says, "In your own time, I feel, haven't I?" But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let's go through the episodes. See, now there was an actual order change up to this series, which meant that the original episodes weren't broadcast in the order that they were meant to be. Now the sort of accepted order, the order that they were originally broadcast in, is kind of the accepted order. It's the order that they were. They're on the DVD now, and they're usually broadcast in this order now, which is Camille, DNA, Justice, White Hole, Dimension Jump, and Meltdown. I used to know the original order because I believe that they were initially released on VHS in that order. But I can't really tell you. I used to know what the proper order of them was. I know that Dimension Jump was always meant to be the series opener, but that was shunted to episode 5, and Meltdown was shunted down the list to episode 6. The reason being that there's a sort of strong military aspect to those episodes. Meltdown does deal with an all-out war, and of course Ace Rimmer is a fighter pilot. Ace Rimmer being, of course, Arnold Rimmer's alter ego, his more heroic alter ego, a sort of Top Gun inspired character. So they were shunted to the latter half of the series. The reason being that the Gulf War actually broke out at the same time as Series 4 started. So the BBC were trying to avoid anything that was sort of overtly militaristic, if that's even a word, or with strong allusions to war. So they were shunted down the list, which is why. And also February the 14th 1991 obviously is Valentine's Day, as it is in every year. Camille being essentially a romantic episode, the closest Red Dwarf has ever got to a romantic comedy, really. That was deemed to be a good series opener because it essentially involves all of the crew initially falling in love, but especially Crichton, because Crichton falling in love is an interesting area to explore, him being an android and never experiencing love. So let's go through the episodes. So episode 1, as I say, Camille. The basic plot line is that is the one with the driving test, the funny driving testing. In the midst of Crichton taking his driving test, and partway through, which is one of the great sort of sketchy openings that Red Dwarf's famous for. Partway through the driving test, Crichton and Rimmer go down onto a planet, and Crichton discovers what he initially believes to be another mechanoid, but who looks just like him. However, there's something not quite right because he rescues her and takes her back to the ship. However, when the rest of the crew see the character who we think is a mechanoid, they don't see a mechanoid. They see their perfect woman, and this leads to a lot of comedy where Crichton's baffled that, but they all know her as Camille, and so this leads to a lot of comedy where Crichton's baffled that Rimmer finds Camille attractive. It's like, would you find me attractive? Of course not. I think you look like a giant half-chewed rubber tip pencil. So, so later on, it transpires. Of course, the reason they're seeing a different woman is because she's not a mechanoid at all. She's actually a gelf. She's a pleasure gelf, and when you look at Camille, you see the perfect woman. What's interesting about this episode is that the actresses they get in to play their version of Camille are in fact the partners or the them partners of the cast. So the Camille that Craig Charles sees, it was Craig Charles' girlfriend at the time. The Camille that Rimmer sees was Chris Barry's. I believe that it's still his wife today. Judy Pascoe, Robert Llewellyn's partner, plays the mechanoid. And so Robert Llewellyn says he's got these great photos in his house of him and his wife both in the Crichton makeup, a very romantic moment for them. The exception, of course, always being Cat, who doesn't see a woman. He just sees himself, the object of his desire and fascination. Ooh, what about it? My knees are still shaking. And so, of course, Cat, never gets really lucky when it comes to meeting the female Cat, the woman of his dreams. And a very funny moment when in this episode where Camille finally reveals her true form, and she's just they go for the all-out silly, gross-out giant blob. She looks like a big bogey essentially, but Crichton, being the most tender-hearted character, sees through this all and decides to go on a date anyway with Camille in her true form. And then the episode ends rather bizarrely on with an allusion to Casablanca. They go and watch Casablanca in the cinema when they're on the date, and it becomes their film. So it ends rather nicely with Crichton and Rimmer saying, Crichton, I think this could be the start of a beautiful friendship. Lots of references to old films in the early days. I suspect this was Rob Grant's input as well, him being the old movie buff. You don't really get the allusions to actors like Doug McClure anymore in Red Dwarf. DNA's episode 2, that's an interesting one. Only because I reviewed Siliconia the other day, and I said that Siliconia is essentially the reverse of DNA, the same idea but flip reverse. This is where Crichton gets his DNA rewritten, so he turns into a human. This was really, I guess, an excuse just for the audience to see what Crichton or Robert Llewellyn looks out like without the makeup on. And indeed, it's fun to see Robert Llewellyn. I think Robert Llewellyn is a very funny comedic actor. The same way I like Harry H. Corbett. I just like his exaggerated manner as an actor. So it's fun to see him play Crichton without the makeup. Because what's interesting is Robert Llewellyn says that in order to emote through the rubber mask, he has to pull his face in when he's acting, and lots of exaggerated expressions. Just to get any sort of emotion through the mask. And this is how he chooses to play Crichton as a man, with all lots of exaggerated expressions and crazy hair. Lots of funny moments in this. The key scene really in this is Crichton's conversation with Lister, in which he's discovered his penis for the first time, and you get the infamous Polaroid scene where he's basically taken pictures because he doesn't know how to control his penis, so he takes pictures of it to show to Lister. And there's one where he gives him two, and he can't quite figure it out at first. Then he puts them together, and this expression of shock comes over his face. He's got an erection, but he's got an erection from looking at a Hoover, which tells Rimmer that sorry, I'm getting flustered here because I hate it when people try and ring when I'm making these. Withheld number, so not talking. The episode ends with the curry monster as well, where Lister's curry gets turned into a monster by the DNA machine, and Lister decides to rewrite his DNA to turn him into a superhuman man plus, and it essentially turns him into half man, half Robocop, but something goes wrong and it shrinks him down to half the size. Very, very funny scene. And of course it ends with the lager. They defeat the curry monster with a can of lager, because lager's the only thing that can kill a Vindaloo. Episode 3 is Justice. This is one of my favourite episodes. I couldn't really tell you why. I wouldn't say it's necessarily one of the best episodes. There's just something about it that I really like. It's one that I found myself watching more than most. It's sort of a perfect Red Dwarf episode because it finds a fine balance between the sci-fi and the comedy. The plot is that they go to a justice colony, a prison, but there's no bars or guards or anything, and the reason there is because they have something up called the Justice Zone, whereby nobody can commit a crime, because the minute anybody commits a crime there, the consequences of their actions are then relayed back on themselves. So if they try to set fire to something, they will catch fire. If they try and hurt somebody, hit them over the head, the force will just be enacted on their head instead. And of course, this leads to a very funny denouement where they essentially have a battle with a simulant, a killer android, if you like. They're known as simulants in Red Dwarf, a very funny fight scene where the simulant's trying to strangle Lister, but he's strangling himself, and he starts handing him things saying, hey, hit me over the head with this and this and this, and then eventually Cat comes up. He says, I've got you, buddy. No. Bong. Bonk. It's a really fun episode. It's also fun because you have a central storyline where Rimmer gets tried for not fixing the drive plate properly on Red Dwarf, which leads to the accident that kills off the entire crew. So he's Rimmer, the smug bastard who thinks he's going to get away with all crimes, ends up getting tried for the murder of 1,164 people, and sentenced to 8,000 years or something along those lines. A good episode. The only thing that really mars this episode is I think they filmed it towards the end of the run where they were running out of money, and some of the sets left something to be desired. There's one set in particular which is meant to be the kind of the courtroom, which is meant to take place, I guess, in a corridor that looks like it's sort of stretching off into infinity. But all they could afford to do was a corridor with sort of painted ceiling and floor that went to what was obviously a very close backspace, and then on the wall behind them, they kind of, it's supposed to be a forced perspective, but it doesn't look that way at all. It's obviously just something that the design of the floor going up into the middle of the wall, which I'm not explaining it very well. This is where clips need to come in, but suffice to say, it doesn't look like a corridor stretching off into infinity at all. It just looks like a badly designed set that was done at the last minute. White Hole, another really imaginative episode. I'd say something for this series. This is really where they broke with the formula that they set up with series 1, 2, and 3, which is 4 sci-fi heavy episodes and 2 character-based episodes. I say this is the first series that really has, where all 6 episodes are really sort of strong sci-fi themed episodes, which is why because this is the series that drew me in. This is the series that for me, the sci-fi heavy episodes are my favourites, over the character led episodes. I'm all for the character development episodes, but my favourite episodes of Red Dwarf are the ones with the heavy dose of conceptual sci-fi. White Hole is no exception. The crew essentially discover a white hole, which is the opposite of a black hole. A black hole sucks time in because the force of gravity is so strong. A white hole spews time out into space, so it essentially leads to time dilation problems on Red Dwarf. People talking slowly on one side of the room and quickly on the other. You sound like Paul Robeson on Dope. A very, very clever scene. A scene that's almost as clever as the scene in Future Echoes from Series 1, where Rimmer and Lister have the same conversation. The first time round it doesn't make sense. The second time round it does make sense because time's catching up with himself. It's essentially that scene, but it's a conversation between all 4 of them where they're deciding how best to deal with the white hole situation. And but it all takes place in the wrong order, you see. So it's confusing to watch, but at the end you know what's happening. It's the infamous "so was it, what is it" scene. This is also the episode where Holly gets rejigged so that she gets her IQ back and she becomes a genius again. Also notable for the return of Talkie Toaster from the first time from Series 1. He was meant to be he was in a deleted scene in Series 2 in which him and Kat form a band. Of course, this being the post-Series 3, he looks very different from the Talkie Toaster of Series 1 and sounds different as well, and that being down to the fact that he's not played by, I believe the guy's name was John Lenihan, who played him in Series 1 and 2. Here he's played by David Ross, who played Crichton in Series 2. And I guess just an excuse to get David Ross back because they really enjoyed working with David Ross, and he does a fine job as Talkie Toaster. He's very funny. Has some great lines as the psychotic toaster who's gone mental and won't stop asking the crew if they want any toast. We're not no buns, baps, baguettes or bagels, and especially no smacking flapjacks. So you're a waffle man. Love the episode. Oh, and the episode culminates with Lister playing pool with planets, essentially a thermonuclear device thrown into a planet to go and block up the white hole, and the time that was spewed into the universe will essentially be lost. So essentially the the episode never really happens in the Dwarfist timeline, which is why it ends with Crichton comfortably telling Rimmer what he really thinks of him, a fotty little squirt. Although, confusingly enough, Lister does make a reference in series 5 to the fact that he's played Pool with Planets, which is technically wrong. He shouldn't be able to remember playing Pool with Planets because technically in their timeline, Whitehall never happened. No wonder I never had a girlfriend to my early 20s. Episode 5 is the classic dimension jump. Really good episode. Again, it involves parallel universes coming into it. It involves Ace Rimmer, who's kind of a dashing fighter pilot from another dimension, of course played by Chris Barry, who goes off in search of other dimensions and other Ace Rimmers, and the first one he stumbles across is, of course, our universe. And great fun to see because all the cast appear in the first 5 minutes of the episode in different forms. So again, for the second time in the series, you get Robert Llewellyn playing a humanoid character. He had previously appeared in series 3 as a worker for Diva Droid International. Is it Diva Droid International, or am I getting that confused with the Hitchhikers? I think it's Diva Droid International. He wouldn't really appear again in humanoid form, I think, till series 8, where again he plays the data doctor, the guy who's there to essentially give Crichton's instructions on how to wipe Crichton's hard drive. He appears as Ace Rimmer's boss. Hattie Atreus gets to appear in full form as well. Craig Charles appears as Spanners, and Danny John Jules does a wonderful turn as a kindly old West Indian preacher, padre. So great fun for the cast to to see them out of character, and classic episode. It's kind of a double-edged sword episode, really, because they because it was such a fan favourite. Then later series, the event episode always became the return of Ace Rimmer. He's returned twice now, and I'm kind of dreading. I think he might be returning again in series 12, which I'm kind of dreading because I really don't want to see Chris Barry now in his late 50s playing the dashing Ace Rimmer. It's going to have a slight air of Roger Moore era, latter Roger Moore era Bond about it. But when he played him originally in his with the original wig on, he was absolutely perfect. Meltdown is it's a real it's not really a favourite of the fans. This I don't think it's that bad an episode. The crew end up on Wax World, and it was meant to be a theme park with all this famous historic figures from history on it, but they've broken the programming, and now all the good characters from human history are fighting all the bad characters. So you get Elvis and Marilyn Monroe and Gandhi essentially going to war, and with evil Hitler, Stalin, Rasputin. One of my favourite scenes in all of Dwarf is Tony Hawk's, not the skateboarder, who as Caligula. It's one of my favourite lines ever. Well, one of my favourite scenes ever. He has the line, "Rasputin, I'm very cross indeed." Don't know why I find that so funny, but just saying I'm very cross indeed, what I do. And the scene where cat witnesses Winnie the Pooh getting... No, sorry, it's Lister witnesses Winnie the Pooh getting executed, essentially, and refusing the blindfold. You don't see it, it's just alluded to. It's such a funny image. An underrated episode, not the best, but not the worst by any stretch of the imagination. I'm going to get on to the worst later on in these reviews, believe me. Series 4. I think this is a cracking series, one that holds a special place in my heart because it's the one that it's the series where I discovered Dwarf and discovered what a great show it is, and just what a personal favourite of mine it would become. So I've got a lot of time for series 4 now, and so many great, memorable, funny scenes in it. So join me next time for my review of Series 5 and my thoughts on Series 12, Episode 3. I think it's called Time Wave, the next one. I might be mixing them up. But until next time, folks, this is me, Big Buddha, signing off, and I shall see you all out there in YouTube land.